So I saw Spider-Man No Way Home last week, and apparently so did everybody else on planet Earth because it is the third highest grossing movie of all time, and which is pretty remarkable considering the last 2 years that we've had. But apparently cinemas are back and box office is back in big business, and so I'm not going to complain about that. And because everybody has seen this, I'm going to spoil it in this review and just kind of chip in with my thoughts, my opinions. I'm going to start off, as I always do, with a synopsis, and then I'm going to talk about the things that I liked, things that I would ding, and then just things that I just like to talk about. Starting off with a synopsis, as if you don't know what this movie is about. It is about Peter Parker dealing with the ramifications of Spider-Man Far From Home, where Jake Gyllenhaal, Mysterio, revealed Spider-Man's identity. Everybody now knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and it is making his life very difficult. He's trying to get into university and just kind of live his normal Peter Parker life, and he just can't do that anymore now that everybody knows that he is Spider-Man. And so he goes to Doctor Strange and asks him to cast a spell so that everybody forgets what Mysterio has told them, or rather, cast a spell that makes everybody forget that Peter Parker is Spider Man, as Doctor Strange says, which I'll talk about later because that spell, I have some questions about that spell. Long story short, the spell goes wrong, the multiverse cracks open, and Alfred Molina and Willem Dafoe and Jamie Foxx all come crashing through, and Peter has to deal with sending them all home. And it's very hard to go home, and the title suggests that there's no way home, and he has to deal with that. So, things I liked about the movie. I liked Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina's performances very much. I love the Raimi Spider-Man movies. They are my favorite Spider-Man movies. I don't dislike this Tom Holland trilogy. I have pretty much enjoyed all of them. Far From Home was my least favorite, but I did actually really enjoy Homecoming, despite not expecting to. And I did enjoy this movie more than I expected to. But the Raimi films were my first Spider-Man movies. They were the first Spider-Man movies, and so they have a very dear place in my heart. And part of the reason why they're so great is because the villains were actually really great in the first two movies. Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin and Alfred Molina as Doctor Octopus were just great, and they really don't feel like cash-ins in this movie. They don't feel like they were just there for checks. They felt like they actually really cared and they wanted to. This is a word that's being thrown around a lot. Look, it's fan service. And for me, the best way to. I'm a fan. I'm a big Spider Man fan, lifelong. And the best way to service me, you could say, would be just to make a good movie. It's not just plonking actors and characters that I've seen before into a movie, but it's actually telling a good story with these characters and using the opportunities that including them presents to tell a good story and create a very entertaining experience, more than you would have if they weren't in the movie. The novelty factor of having just a lot of actors in a movie is something that's kind of worn off on me now, and that's something I felt watching this. That look, we've had the Avengers 10 years ago in 2012, and that movie kind of really broke my brain in terms of like, wow, you can see Iron Man talking to Hulk, and you can see Thor talking to Captain America, and I saw all them in individual films, and now they're all in the same film. I get now, I understand, my 25-year-old brain understands that you can give actors in Hollywood a check and then they will show up into your green screen CGI movie where they can be easily composited in. And so just casting actors in a movie isn't enough to get a glowing, amazingly positive review out of me. You can use nostalgia on me a little bit, but it's not going to carry a movie that I don't think is good. But this movie was actually good. It carried a interesting tale, and I really like where it ended up. I really feel that for the last, not just the last two Spider-Man movies, but every time Tom Holland Spider-Man has appeared in the MCU, it's kind of felt like Spider Boy or like a Spider Man that was just a kid and hadn't really evolved into himself, even though there were plenty of moments in like Far From Home and Homecoming that you got hints of that Spider Manness. I really feel at the end of this movie, he's not Spider Kid anymore. He is very much Spider Man and dealing with the burden and all of the life stuff that Spider Man has to deal with. And I thought that was very mature and very well handled and very true to the character. And so that I would say is probably the highlight of the plot for me. Of course, since I am going to just spoil stuff in this review, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield do show up. And look, I love both of them. And I have been seeing online people talking about Andrew Garfield Spider Man and thinking, actually, Andrew Garfield is so great in this movie. The Amazing Spider Man movies, perhaps I judged you too harshly. And these are actually good movies, and they're actually just entertaining fun. Two things can be true at once, I believe. I think Andrew Garfield can be a great actor, a very talented actor. I believe he can be a perfect casting for Peter Parker and Spider Man. I remember how excited I was when the first Amazing Spider Man teaser came out and it was announced that it was going to be Andrew Garfield. I was super excited because he even looks like him. He even looks like he came out of the Ultimate Spider Man comic, and he's a great actor. But those movies are not good. Like the first Amazing Spider-Man isn't the worst thing ever, but like the second Amazing Spider-Man is just an absolutely offensive travesty. And it's not just me who thinks that. Like, ask Andrew Garfield. I was reading an interview of him reminding myself what he had to say about the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and he said that he was heartbroken by it. That how could he have expected it to be a genuine effort when there was so much corporate meddling going into it, and it was just a product, and there was just tons of studio interference, and he wasn't happy with the final product. And so it's like Andrew Garfield Spider Man himself is saying that The Amazing Spider Man 2 sucked, and it really did suck. And I think Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone just carried those two movies, and without them, they would have just been nothing. I mean, they weren't written well, they weren't shot well, they weren't scored well. I mean, Hans Zimmer's score and Pharrell Williams' score was just a meme at this point. And so let's just forget about those movies. They weren't good. Let's not do revisionist history. Let's just accept that Andrew Garfield's great as Spider-Man and move on. I know people are trying to make Amazing Spider-Man 3 happen. I mean, anything's possible now. I mean, we got the Snyder Cut earlier this year, so who knows? But yeah, I really did get a kick out of seeing Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in this movie. I think all of them gelled really well, and it's just the coolest thing. It's just Tobey Maguire, man. I will, in my dings about the movie, mention they don't always do what's being shown in the movie justice in the editing. For example, the first time that you see Willem Dafoe's character, it just kind of cuts to him like he's having a shot reverse shot conversation with his Green Goblin mask, and it's like give him like a slow dramatic like pan or a zoom or something. Like the way that it just kind of cuts to him, it reminded me of the way that they showed Jared Leto as the Joker in the Suicide Squad. Or I shouldn't say the Suicide Squad, that's its own movie, in Suicide Squad 2016, where he's just having a conversation with Harley Quinn, and it just goes from Harley to the first time you ever see the Joker, and is just sitting there in a close up, shot of his face. And my friend turned to me, I remember, and he was like, "That's how they show the Joker for the first time." That's how I felt like cutting to Willem Dafoe's face in the first time in this movie. And it happens again with like Tobey Maguire's Raimi suit, where they kind of tease a little bit. He doesn't walk in with it the way that Andrew Garfield walks in his Amazing Spider-Man outfit. And he kind of teases it a little bit. He kind of pulls his, shirt down. You're like, you got the suit on? He's like, yeah, I got the suit on. And then it just kind of cuts later in the first action scene that he's in to just him being in the suit, and I think a CGI version of the suit at that, which is particularly distracting considering how much of the Raimi films were practical, and that is just in such stark contrast to the fact that every time pretty much you're seeing Tom Holland Spider-Man anytime in the MCU, and in fact any costumed character in the MCU, they are just fully CGI. And it's like, I don't care if Tom Holland is wearing the Spider-Man suit on set, I'm looking at CGI, and we're looking at CGI. And so the kind of, the showing off of like, things like Willem Dafoe, things like Tobey Maguire's Raimi suit, I felt weren't done justice by the editing in this movie, and it was kind of choppy. The cinematography in this movie is better than the previous two Spider-Man movies, but I feel like the plot is not necessarily worse, but it just kind of pauses the second that all of the multiverse villains start coming through. You start off with this plot of Peter trying to deal with what Mysterio did and the revelation, and all of that was perfectly fine character stuff. And then the second that Doc Ock shows up, the movie kind of pauses in its plot and it just becomes Peter's going to go to each single one of the villains, say hi to them. They're going to have a character moment. Then it cuts to all of them in Doctor Strange's basement. And again, they're just having character interactions, but there's no real plot going on. And there isn't really any plot then to be had until the second act low point happens. And again, I'm spoiling the movie, so it's when Aunt May dies, gets killed by the Green Goblin, and then she says, "With great power comes great responsibility," which I didn't, I think was that necessary, but like, okay, fine, she said the thing. But then you kind of have some good character stuff of Peter dealing with that and the other two Spider-Men relating to him. And that's the first scene that they have together. And that was great. And then it kind of pauses again to have the big third act Marvel fight that all these movies have to have. And then after that third act fight, the plot comes back and Peter, says goodbye to Ned and MJ, thinking he's going to go right back to them, and then kind of makes his decision at the end of the movie that I was talking about earlier, which I really liked. I really liked that he accepts that people will always be in danger as a result of him being Spider-Man. He just watched his Aunt May die, and he doesn't want, MJ and Ned to end up in that situation either. Speaking of no cuts, there was no cut in that goodbye scene when he's looking at them for the last time to Ned. There was to Zendaya, but not to Ned. And I was like, dude, where's the love for the bros? Like, he's been dating MJ for like a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. And like him and Ned have been best friends for years, and there's just no shot, no cut to Ned at the end. Like, what the hell? But yeah, back to the plot. I like that ending point, but I felt that the plot would often be put on pause in order to just have character interactions with all the villains. And they weren't fully exploited, I felt. There were a few obvious ones that they do go for. I don't think Willem Dafoe had to say, "I'm something of a scientist myself," but like people enjoyed that, so I won't tell you otherwise. But for me, as I say, in terms of fan service, write a new joke, write a new thing. I don't need to hear lines that I've already heard. And Willem Dafoe himself was basically almost laughing when he delivered that. But yeah, there was a point where like Doc Ock and Kurt Connors are in the same, in Doctor Strange's basement, and there's no point where when Jamie Foxx says that's Doctor Kurt Connors, the lizard, and Otto Octavius, as you remember from Spider-Man 2, and Kurt Connors are very close friends. It's actually Doctor Connors who introduces Peter to Doctor Octavius, and so he doesn't, even though it's not his Kurt. I'm surprised he didn't go like, "Kurt, you turned yourself into a lizard? Like, why? How?" It's like, and Toby at no point is like, "Dr. Connors, you're a lizard?" Like, well, how? Why? Like, he had one arm in the Raimi films as well, and so that's just like, I thought that missed a little beat. That could have been funny, but I don't say I found the humor in this movie to be particularly funny. None of the jokes really made me laugh, but they were perfectly inoffensive, and comedy subjective, I guess. I guess the MCU humor is just kind of grating on me at this point, but that's just me personally. Jamie Foxx's character, I'll also say, didn't really feel like his character from The Amazing Spider-Man 2, in that, people are praising this movie for, wow, it integrated all these different characters from all these different, film series so well. And I just feel like they kind of made them all talk and act like MCU cool characters. Like, with the exception of Willem Dafoe, who's maybe didn't even know he was being filmed, you have Jamie Foxx, and his character, Max, is just nothing like his character in Amazing Spider Man 2. His character there was just a nerd. He could barely talk. He was really socially awkward and weird, whereas in this movie, it's just Jamie Foxx. I just could only see Jamie Foxx. I didn't really see a performance. It was just him being cool, saying cool lines, being a cool guy. And I was like, and when Andrew Garfield sees him later, in the third act, and he's like, Max, I missed you. He doesn't seem like the same Max at all. I mean, he's no longer blue for one thing, but I can allow that. But his whole personality is just not the same character. And that also goes for, the lizard is a lot more comedic. And Dr. Octavius doesn't really feel like his character from Spider Man 2 in terms of the arms are making him mad. But I feel like in Spider Man 2, at the point that he's ripped out and put in Tom Holland's universe in the MCU, he wasn't really having his thoughts dominated by the arms. I mean, the arms were influencing him, but he wasn't like a cranky pants that, needed a special chip to like stop listening to them. Like in Spider-Man 2, he stopped listening to the arms just by strengthening his mental resolve. And so it's kind of weird that in this movie, he's ripped out right at that moment, but he's like, the arms are controlling me and I'm going to kill a bunch of innocent civilians. That just didn't ring true to his character in Spider-Man 2, even though I thought, as I say, Alfred Molina did a good job with his performance. And another character that I thought was different and weirder was J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. I know everybody, including me, was really happy to see him back in the role in the post-credit scene of Far From Home. But, I mean, one thing that I kind of thought about, and especially highlighted during this movie, is that J. Jonah Jameson is basically Alex Jones in this universe. And for stuff like the end of Far From Home, where he's put on in Times Square, it's like, could you imagine like CNN like putting Alex Jones on like, the biggest screen in Times Square just because he has a story to break? Like, surely they would just cut to Mysterio's clip and not give like a platform to J. Jonah Jameson. And again, he's like a fast talking newspaper man. And now he's basically the character from PlayStation's Marvel Spider-Man game, who was just the podcaster. And so that didn't feel like Sam Raimi's J. Jonah Jameson at all. And so I'm surprised that fans aren't wanting, more authenticity or more being true to that character from that film, because it's such an iconic performance. I think people just like hearing J.K. Simmons' delivery, and so do I. But that's a character that's just not the same, and I don't really think he's an improvement. I think I would have preferred newspaperman Jameson to Alex Jones Jameson. I'll say the final fight in the movie just took place in the pitch black of night with some scaffolding, which I didn't think was the best location. I mean, it didn't look that great visually, and it wasn't that inspiring or that memorable just on a choreography level or cinematography level. And so that was a bit of a shame, but okay. I preferred the fight in the apartment building where it's just Spider-Man and the Green Goblin going head to head, because it really shows off the Green Goblin's strength. And I think that's something that this movie did really well, was remind everybody that the Green Goblin, even more so than maybe even the first Raimi Spider-Man, he's really scary because he's really powerful and he's really unhinged. And just the fact that you have him being more over the top and powerful physically in terms of his strength in this movie than he was even in Spider-Man 1 um, just makes him a really scary villain. It means that when he shows up, or when, Norman Osborn is turning into the Green Goblin, you're like, oh my god, stuff's gonna go down. All these characters can lose because this guy is just like, he is Spider-Man's arch nemesis, and he always has been in the comics and the animated series. So I think that was a great aspect. That was a great aspect to the movie. In terms of Doctor Strange's inclusion, it was kind of weird how Peter was able to beat him in his own mirror universe. I thought that scene was actually cool visually. And speaking of presentation, I liked the way that the score from particularly the Raimi verse was integrated into the score of this movie when like the Green Goblin showed up and Doc Ock showed up and Tobey Maguire showed up. I think that was a good way of integrating music into a score as opposed to like Star Wars just like spamming a blaringly loud version of an original theme. Um, but yeah, Doctor Strange in his mirror universe, I think that this movie was a bit odd in the way that it treated that, in terms of Peter beats him with like geometry. But Doctor Strange says at the beginning, I can just change anything in this world that I want, and I'm the god. And yet he loses in his own universe. So I'm not a big fan of when smart characters or godlike characters are kind of made stupid just to make the protagonist of a film look smart or look good. And I feel like that's what happened in this movie with Doctor Strange. I just want to say, I enjoyed this movie. I'm going to give it a positive score, but I'm just kind of discussing stuff that I haven't really heard talked about in reviews and that you might not have heard. And so I just want to kind of have a conversation about them. I'm not trying to rag on the movie. And if you have your own contravening thoughts or opinions that disagree with my own, please shout out in the comments. If you agree, disagree, I'd love to talk with you about the movie. And the dislike button is now no longer a thing, and so I don't care about getting dislikes if I talk negatively about everybody's favorite movie. Yeah, but Doctor Strange's spell, like the whole world is going to forget that Peter Parker is Spider Man. Surely a better spell, a more simplistic spell would have just been the whole world is going to forget what Mysterio told them, or just forget about Mysterio, period. I think that probably would have worked out better. The film wouldn't have happened, but and I'm not knocking it for having it, but it's just a bit of a weird plot thing. Also, a weird plot thing is how many people are on Mysterio's side. I mean, Mysterio was a thing for a week, whereas Spider-Man has been an Avenger for years, and he literally saved half the universe. So you'd think he'd have a bit more cachet than Mysterio does, especially since Mysterio is provably fake. Like he's provably used Stark tech and used Stark employees, and this can all be traced and proven by by anybody in Shield, anybody who's in the Avengers group that he's just a fake, and the fact that people side with Mysterio over Spider-Man is kind of crazy. There's a moment where Peter saves a university admissions officer, and she goes like, "Wow, Peter, you're a hero." And it's like, did you think he was a terrorist? Like, it's Spider-Man. He's literally probably saved you from the blip or your family members. So it's kind of weird that people kind of treat Spider-Man like a leper. Maybe if this was a movie that took place right after Homecoming or Civil War or something where Spider-Man wasn't as known, then you could have maybe done a plot like this. But I think Spider-Man's done too much stuff at this point for him to have no bonus points or cachet or reputation with anybody. Being an Avenger, being somebody who's literally saved half the universe in space, to get treated like the way he gets treated in this movie. Another positive for this movie was Zendaya's character. I found her character in Homecoming and Far From Home to be a little bit grating, a little bit too sarcastic, and just kind of comedic relief. Didn't really feel like a character I had much sympathy or empathy for. Whereas in this movie, being Peter's girlfriend and kind of letting that guard down a bit, letting down her shield, some cracks in her armor. She seemed much more likable, much more empathetic, and I preferred her and her performance in this movie much more in this than I did in the previous two. And so that's definitely a plus. And I think another thing that worked to this film's credit is that in previous Spider-Man movies, anytime they've included more than one villain, it's kind of turned into a mess. But in this movie, despite the fact that it has so many, it doesn't fall into that trap because there's so little screen time dedicated to each of them that you can't really have too convoluted or messy or bad of a plot because they each just are there to have little character interactions and their little one moment, and that's pretty much all the movie has time to show. So it doesn't get bogged down or disjointed or shifting in tone. It kind of all kind of moves along at a very brisk, a very nice pace. Even though the movie is 2.5 hours long, it doesn't feel it. It's paced very well. And I think just the fact that it has so many villains means that nobody outstayed their welcome, and everybody gave just enough to what they needed to show and no more. And I think it worked out at the end of the movie. I mean, when I say the plot kind of gets put on pause, I mean in the sense that when all the villains are together and Peter resolves to save them all rather than to let them all go back and die like Doctor Strange wants, he just uses the Tony Stark fabricator to create antidotes or fixes to each of their supervillain powers. And there's not really any thinking or challenge or struggle associated with that. It's just kind of, I'm just magicking a fix for Electro's electricity. I'm just magicking an antidote to make Dr. Connors no longer a lizard. Like, this is all very convenient, entirely plot changing stuff that's happening without any effort, just because you have a fabricator from Tony Stark, a 3D printer, that's kind of solving all your problems. And so it's kind of that whole middle chunk of the movie just exists to have fan service, just exists to have these characters interacting with each other and saying their favorite one-liners. And people enjoyed it. People in my theater enjoyed it. Everybody else enjoyed it. But for me, as I say, I prefer plot being peppered all the way through the film, evenly spread. I feel like this film had it at the beginning, had it at that second act closer low point, and had it at the very end. And it didn't really have it for the other parts. Um, Overall, I enjoyed Spider Man No Way Home. It was definitely a fun nostalgia trip. It was definitely the best directed of the three John Watts movies in terms of visuals. In terms of my ranking of the three, I actually would probably say I preferred Spider Man Homecoming just because it has a consistent plot spread throughout. I don't feel like the plot stopped because of action or character moments. I feel like it was always going, and I just liked that Spider Man plot a lot. And so I would go Homecoming, No Way Home, and then Far From Home. And so I gave Homecoming at the time a 7 out of 10. I give Spider Man No Way Home a 6 out of 10, which I want to stress for me is a positive review. Films for me start at a 5, and most of these Hollywood superhero MCU movies get a 6 anyway. And so I think like Infinity War and Endgame are the only ones that have gotten like a 7 or an 8, or an 8 certainly. So like a 6 is not a terrible review for me. I gave No Way Home a 6, and I gave Far From Home a 5, just because it's just down the middle film that didn't do that much for me. And yeah, I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed it. I'm going to keep saying I enjoyed it just to balance out all the critiques. I feel like I said a lot of negative stuff. I feel like I said positive stuff as well. As I say, I really liked where this movie ended up. I really liked the fact that this felt like a Spider Man that I knew and that I loved, and I can't wait to see where he goes next. I don't know if they're going to make another trilogy with Tom Holland. I don't know if they're going to just make him be in Sony movies now with Venom. By the way, that was a mean tease they did at the end of Venom Let There Be Carnage, where they had like the suggestion that Eddie Brock was going to be in the same universe as Tom Holland. And then in this movie's post-credit scene, they just rip that away. Just rip it away. They just send him straight back to the Sonyverse. And so I don't know if Tom Holland will appear in there or if he'll just appear in Avengers movies. But either way, Spider-Man has arrived, and everybody is better off for it. I'm sure you've seen this movie. If you haven't and you are excited for it, you will love it. If you've watched it, if you've watched this review, you've just been spoiled, but there you go. Spider Man No Way Home. Thank you very much for watching, and please stay tuned for my reviews coming out over the course of the next several weeks. And I will see you guys in the next one.